Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the podcast that shares ideas on how to upgrade your lead generation. Here is your host, Glenn Schmeltzley.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome back to Funnel Reboot. Today, we'll hear about a new database technology paradigm. But can I first just ask you for something? Would you please let me know that you've heard an episode? Tell me if you liked it or didn't like it. Even just comment back or give it a like on Instagram or Twitter. I'd really, really appreciate it. So to today's episode. When we handle data, we don't always think about where the data is pulled from or where it's going next. And all the APIing and copying and resorting that we do with data, well, those data sets, they kind of end up like the exhibits in the Night at the Museum movies, going God knows where when they're out of our sight. And this is leading to an even bigger problem than big data. With all of this propagating, flying in the face of how privacy regulations are telling us marketers to do our job, this is not going in the right direction. But the good news is there may be new technology that can turn this around and change the current problems that we have with data. And today's guest is going to tell us about that. Our guest has a degree from Bishop's University. He is in charge of strategy at the Data Collaboration Alliance, as well as category director at Cinchi. Prior to this, he headed up go-to-market strategy for a taxi marketplace with a network of 35,000 licensed taxi drivers called Halo. He's also held strategy roles with Virage Sale, with ChangeJar, FlexDay, and he managed the Greater Toronto Area launch of Lyft. Please join me in welcoming Chris McLellan. So glad to welcome Chris McLellan. Thanks for coming on, Chris.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So I know you wear a bunch of hats, but we're here to talk about how data is changing. So would you mind telling me which incarnation of Chris we're going to hear from on that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I wear a few hats, as you say. I'm a fellow podcaster. I've got a little podcast on artificial intelligence, specifically for Canada, called Ask AI. But as a day job, I work for a Toronto-based. But what does geography mean in today's day and age? I happen to sit in Ottawa. Most
Right.
of my colleagues are in Toronto. But we're about a 3 to 3.5 year old startup, as I say, based in Toronto, and we're in the category of data fabric and dataware technology, which we can touch on in a bit. And for them, I've got a funny job title, or a new one for a lot of people, known as Director of Category. And we can touch on that if you like to. And my third hat is, as part of that work, I am the Director of Operations at a nonprofit called the Data Collaboration Alliance. So those are my hats. Yeah.
Wow.
But they all kind of overlap a little. It's not as bad as it sounds, but it keeps me busy.
Yeah, cool. And let's perhaps begin with maybe challenging the notion that, there need to be all of these different outreach methods for telling people about what's new with data. We can go back to cave drawings or Babylonian clay tablets that, have scratched on them, number of bushels of grain, or, people were keeping track of stuff a long, long, long time ago. And when computers came along, we went ahead and thought about how a computer would be able to do a much better job than a big dusty book. So we, went ahead and made these things called databases that, just sat on a hard drive and kept that data there. Am I missing something? Have we, kind of discovered something new with data? Did data need something new to be done with it?
Well, yeah, it's funny you brought up the bushels of grain, because I just completed a storyboard for a video that will be out soonish about the history of data ownership
Oh,
and
wow.
where it all started from cave people through to today, and looking a bit into the near future. And yeah, you're absolutely right that the first sort of recorded, at least one we know about, instance of data being in a sort of abstracted, non-cave drawing type of format, if you want to consider it an image data, which you can. So a
Yeah.
cave drawing is a form of data, but it was scratches on clay tablets, and it was for tax collection. Not very romantic, but they were, like you say, it was. I think the first one that we researched was something like, so and so, so and so some money for some bushels of barley for some beer. It's like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
But whereas but what we discovered is through doing the storyboard in the history of data and data ownership and control was that there's some factors at play with regard to data. So one is sort of literacy, and another is transport, I guess, portability, if you will. So is it easy to copy, and do you know how to copy it? And so when you think back to the Byzantine Empire, whichever that was, and
Sure.
move forward through time, there was only so many people that were literate, either in a numeric kind of way,
Yes.
or a symbolic kind of way, or even in a language or a written or a syntax way. So that was a restriction on copies. And my whole thesis, I guess, when it comes to data, whether marketing or otherwise, is that it's all about control and or lack of control that a rightful data owner, whether it's a customer or an organization or a government agency, has over it. So to go back to our history of data, canned history here, these factors that over time really came into play. So was somebody literate, i.e., could copy it,
Hmm.
and was it easy to copy? It's pretty hard to copy a cave drawing. You got to
Yeah,
chisel
you
it out of
can't
the
take it
wall.
with you. Yeah.
Clay tablet, also kind of a specialized skill, and you got to know how to write. So then you fast forward through history, and even if you get into recently modern times, there were still scribes. Like there was only so many people
Yep.
that knew how to widely read and write. And I think it was the UK became the first country that was over 50% of the population was literate, and that wasn't until like late 1600s. I'm going to say maybe it was after that.
Hmm.
So even the ability to copy information is relatively recent. But as you touched on, fast forward a little bit more into the 20th century, data starts to become, the printing press was a huge advent, and then that made copying of information much more widespread. But even then, you had to own a printing press. Like not everyone had a printer on their spare table as they do today.
Yeah.
but but then keep fast forwarding, and then get into the digital and the computerized era, and increasingly data is becoming easier to copy, and the means of doing that become more and more widespread. So you're putting fuel on the fire of data ownership, data privacy, data protection, data governance, because copies, if you think of it, are really the enemy of control. And there's a good reason why we make money hard to copy. It's a good reason why we have
Yeah.
intellectual property is hard to copy, because these things have value. And we're increasingly learning that data has value too. And yet most people are sort of in the cycle of copies, and not out of necessarily ill will, but out of necessity. Because about 40 years ago, a little company called Oracle launched the relational database. And very soon after that, we started developing applications that each of which had a database or a data store accompanied with it. And so what's happened increasingly over the last 40 years is that, data has not only been copied at scale, but fragmented at scale, because there's an app for everything and a database for every app, whether that app is bought
Right.
or built. And so we're in a position today, marketers, but everybody else is in a world where data is highly siloed, as we all know. And, even small businesses, I think, now carry something like an average of 250 apps. Enterprise organizations have, thousands, up to 10,000 apps.
Sure.
And to exacerbate the problem of siloing is copies. So we all understand, let's say for analytics purposes, but other purposes as well, if you want to build a new app, you have to cross integrate it. You have to do data integration with your old silos. Not all of them necessarily, but a good number of them.
Yes.
And that's a process, as I said, of data integration. And that's just a fancy way of saying copying at scale. So there's subterranean copies going back and forth between data silos, which is making things like data governance, data protection, data privacy, I would argue, a near impossible challenge for anybody. And that's not out of, like I said, like malice, but out of just that's how apps work. So if we want to change all that, we need to change how we build apps.
So let me see if I got this straight. Because I agree with you that once we try to do integration, such as a marketer who wants to understand how did the ads that I was running that resulted in form fills, how did those progress into qualified leads, and how did those leads turn into customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm stepping across a few different apps there
Mm-hmm.
and databases. But you said that essentially what we're doing is we're taking chunks of that data and propagating copies so that
Mm-hmm.
we can do things like join them together, or at least join the summary, like the key field together.
Yeah.
And I guess that has its own hazards. I mean, many of us are just happy to have gotten there, but um, dive in a little bit more
Yeah.
into what problems that might cause. What are the things that, if we've made that database purpose built, or databases,
Yeah.
how have we painted ourselves into a corner?
Yeah. So, you think about how you're going to, so the root cause of the problem and everything I'll probably bring up today is silos. The fact that data is fragmented.
Yeah.
And bringing it back, Humpty Dumpty, back together somehow is the challenge of our time. So whether your outcome is a single customer view or a customer 360 view or a prospect 360, or you want to bring data together for analytical purposes or to train an AI algorithm, or
Yep.
all these reasons why you need to bring data back together from the silos. Today, 98% of data management technologies are really band-aids on the core issue, the root cause of the problem of those silos. And so, for example, a customer data platform, which is very in vogue right now, and for
Yes.
good reasons, because people want those sweet 360 customer views so they can offer personalized services and do all the other good stuff. The way those sort of platforms, but I'm going to include data warehouses here, data lakes,
Data lakes.
databases, everything data you've heard of, except for a few things I hope to bring up today, are really band-aids on that issue, which is that they don't de-silo your organ. If you have 200 apps, they
Yep.
aren't going to help you necessarily eliminate any of those apps. They're going to take data. Oh, data virtualization is another technology I
Yeah.
should have thrown into the mix, another band-aid. So they're gonna take some form of copy through API
Yep.
or a distributed query in the case of data virtualization, and bring it into this new platform. Well, that's good. And normally these are read-only copies. So that's not operational data. It's not the actual lifeblood of your organization. It's a read-only copy of it for the
Yeah.
most part. Now,
Yeah.
data warehouse people are going to get out of their seats and go, no.
Yeah.
But
Or I
yes,
guess
in
the
some,
data
yeah,
mart people who like to say, well, yes, ours are just there for one specific thing that we're
sure.
looking at. It's a dead
Well, a
end.
data
We know it
mart
is.
is a subset of a data warehouse. So
Right.
within a data warehouse, you have a data mart, but
Ugh.
but these technologies lack something known as data persistence, which databases have, i.e., they can't power a new app. They can organize data and they can help you read it and master it and increase its quality and visualize it. But generally speaking, they lack persistence. You're not going to build a new app from those platforms. Therefore,
Well,
when you go to build
yeah.
a new app, you're creating another silo.
And where it comes down to a point is, if I need just one new field of information and that
Mm-hmm.
wasn't in the original set, I'm
Right.
SOL, right?
Correct. So it's not you're not changing the original. Yeah, exactly right. I won't embellish that point. I think you've made it well. And so if you think these are band-aids, so the reason why they're band-aids, they're good technology, don't get me wrong, and they're
Sure.
good for
They got us here.
they got us here and everything. That's how technology, I often say to people, technology, creating tomorrow's problems today.
Or
it's how
sure.
technology goes, right? I mean, it evolves, and today's solution is tomorrow's problem is tomorrow's solution. It's how it
Yes.
goes. It's evolutionary. And so, but these technologies aren't fixing the root cause of those silos. So when you want to, create new applications to, launch a new product or launch a new customer platform or a new real-time system or any of these things, they're not helping you not build new silos or buy them in the case of SaaS apps. So you're still stuck in this world, this trap of more and more silos. Okay, you've taken care of some analytical outcomes. That's okay, right? So you've been able to redirect or copy some data from silos into a new platform and look at it as a dashboard or charts or analytics. But you haven't addressed the fundamental issue that's at odds with your ability to innovate and with odds at your ability to offer your customers and your partners a level of data protection that you might have to offer them under GDPR, for example.
Sure.
And that's an increasing tension in marketing is part of a bigger organization. We don't sit alone. So we have to increasingly recognize that innovation and data protection are at odds right now, and we need to find a way to make them two sides of the same coin, not enemies, because data protection will always win ultimately this war.
Yes.
Well, you say that, maybe not. People
Okay.
love apps,
Ebbs and
so
flows. But
so
if you take the
yeah.
last 3 years of what we've experienced in the digital space, then yeah, protection has definitely been on the rise. On the innovation front, so is it fair to say that why we can't innovate is because we are always taking data from some entity that was
Mhm.
designed first, and we're catching it after the fact, so we're always a step behind, and thus it's almost categorically impossible to innovate. You can't get ahead if you're behind.
I think yes, and it's. I'll just go back to I call them silos. So data is trapped in silos, and so when you want to build something new, you need to connect some of those silos into your new silo, and that
Yes.
gets exponentially worse with time, not linearly worse
Good
with time.
point.
So
And
you're
it's a
having to.
nodal thing too, right? It
It's an
goes,
you can think of these silos as, yeah, sure, nodes in an unconnected network almost, because it's
ouch.
not a network. That's the problem. Is
Yeah.
they're silos, and so you can try to fake a network through APIs and exchange copies, but the network isn't at the data level. It's at that copy level. So you are connecting silos, but that's not the same as connecting the fabric of the data itself. And that's really where the future lies, is creating an internet of data. More, I could probably use that term. It's
Sure.
like hyperlinked data is kind of the future, more than connecting silos with copies. But so the problem with innovation in these silos is, as I said, data integration, connecting those silos with via copies, the exchange of copies, can account for 30-50% of today's projects. That's why IT, when you go, can we build this new feature, this new app, and they go 18 months and $5 million, it's
Yeah.
because half of that is just on the overhead, that innovation tax, if you will, of data integration, which gets compoundingly worse with every new silo you add. And so there will be a time, I used to use this term called the cliff of complexity, that there is a point where, just by following the logic, data integration will be 95% of your new projects. And the innovation part, building the new feature, service, what have you,
Sure.
will be almost none of it. And so obviously that's unsustainable if you fast forward peer into the future. I don't know whether that's
No, it
3,
sounds
5, or 10 years, but
it
it's coming.
sounds almost like an economics problem. I mean, it's one of these, like, it's almost Malthusian, right? With this,
Yeah.
we've got something that is constantly growing mixed with something's fixed. Or the other one I hear, I guess this is Freakonomics, is you can only, if you've got a highway network in a place like LA, you can only
Mhm.
add so many more lanes. And with each additional lane you add, more cars come on the road. And the average speed that you will get on that road, no matter if the number of lanes is increasing, the
Yeah.
speed will come down, and you eventually don't have a road,
Yeah.
you have a parking lot.
But that's a linear problem where incremental numbers of cars are being added. Now imagine that in the data and the IT world where exponential numbers of cars are being, so you add a lane and you don't get 2 more cars, you get 200 more cars.
Yikes.
So it's that, so that's what happens when you have to backwards connect with an increasing number of silos, right? So it's exponential, not incremental.
So what's the solution?
I'm glad you asked. Well, I mean, part of the solution is what I love about what I do at Cinchi and what the technology we work on, which is referred to as a data fabric or data-aware technology. And these are new categories, and not everyone defines them the same. I need to
Sure.
point that out at the start. Some people define a data fabric as a read-only thing, and so not really fixing the silo problem. At Cinchi, we define it differently as creating almost a network of data at the data set level and using linked data and other capabilities. So imagine, if you will, though, your brain. The brain is a network of information. We don't know everything about how the brain works, but the research indicates that each one of us, you, me, maintains or manages more information than even the biggest organization on the planet. Like imagine the biggest bank, if you will.
Yep.
You've got more data in your head than it has. So, and it does it in a shockingly small, compact form. I mean,
Sure.
it's more I learn about the brain, the more it's the center. It's just incredible. And I know that sounds banal to say almost, but it really is when you get more into the data world and you start to recognize the sheer efficiency and plasticity and just how it works. So we don't know everything about the brain and how it works, of course. But we do know it's a network of axons and neurons, right?
Yep.
It manages network data information as a network. Now, I think the latest theory is it operationalizes information, i.e., into thoughts and ideas and speech via some form of waves, but I won't get into that. But so why can't we create the same sort of design, at least, if not functionality exactly, in the digital world? Well, we can, and that's where companies like Cinchi and technologies and categories that I'm trying to promote through my activities, like data fabrics, some of them, and dataware, come into play. And so what they do is actually think of a spreadsheet, if you will, which is a tabular form of data, or a tabular expression of data. There's rows and columns. Now imagine that each of those columns could be hyperlinked to another data set or another table somewhere else, and you start to get a little taste of how this can work. Now imagine Glenn has an environment or a node, if you will,
Sure.
that has a bunch of tables that are linked, and maybe it's a personal node. You have your personal information on it. Maybe mine's an organizational node, and I have a lot more data sets, but they're all linked. Now imagine we could link across the boundary, just like you link to websites. So you could grant me access to your data. Now we can get into the weeds here. We probably shouldn't, but I'm just trying to give the broad idea what the solution to silos is. And the solution is a network of data at the data level. So, but there's a lot of outcomes of that on data protection, which are awesome. But the first thing is, if you start to organize, and this is operational, so this isn't pie in the sky technology.
Yep.
This is used by every bank in Canada already. That's Cinchi counts as customers, but many others, including the YMCA and the Mozilla Foundation, like really interesting customers. But that linking, what it does is eliminate the need to create new database silos and or do data integration when you build new digital solutions. Like, that's kind of mind-blowing. And that's the essence of what we do is leverage this new architecture, this network-based architecture of linked data sets that have other capabilities in there, but I'll leave it there, that enable you to build, let's say, one platform, thousands of solutions, no new databases, no data integration based on copies. Now, there is a migration path on how to connect and upgrade and eventually decommission your old silos.
Sure.
And that's another conversation perhaps. But if you're a startup today, for example,
right,
and you're starting greenfield, blank slate, you would be siloless and integrationless for forever. And so that's kind of the answer, if you will, to the silo and copy problem.
Gonna see if I get this straight. So
It's new,
I,
but and
obviously,
it's
but the thing that I suppose we kind of have a mental you know place right now that keeps us not seeing that is probably like the same issue that we've had prior to the pandemic, at least, of thinking that work is a place where we go, so it's geographically different from where we are here. And I'm just using that as a, I've got my home and then I've got my
yeah,
office. And that mental framework meant that we were keeping the idea of work as a place. And
yeah.
I'm not at that place. And I know how far I am from that place. Now, if we're kind of thinking more internet based, link based, what we've kind of done is, I guess, just made all the distances equidistant, right? It doesn't matter if I'm hopping, within, let's say, one column of something that I have next to another column, and I
Mhm.
have them both. But then I click and I'm going to yet another column, but that other column is way out somewhere, like in another organization. But to
Yeah,
me, it's just one click different. It's not,
exactly.
it's no
Networks.
more or less.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of networks, the brain, telephone networks, the internet, what networks do is abstract complexity. So you just plug into them, right? Like, can you imagine if your phone, when you got a new phone, you had to connect it with every device in your home
Right.
all at once? And,
Right.
or, yeah, what you do is just log into Wi-Fi and then bam, your phone's connected to everything else you've got. And so networks abstract complexity.
For
Like, that's
sure.
what they do.
Yeah.
And so there was a time when we used to use this metaphor at Cinci for prospect. It's like there was a time when every factory used to have its own power plant, and produce its own electricity at a
Right.
mill, for
And
example, or have a mill wheel.
we would think of
But
that
then
as being
along
silly.
today we think it's silly, and if you told them that there'd be a network that would enable to deliver them power from some faraway source,
Right.
they'd be like, what are you talking about? But of course now that's routine, and that's how the world works, is on networks of computers called the internet, networks of electricity called the grid, networks of tissue called the brain. These networks enable, like I say, it simplifies and abstracts complexity away from situations. So
Okay.
bringing this to data is how you simplify data and stop making silos and copies.
Yeah, because you're going there and
You're connecting it, you're linking it, you're not
right.
copying it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or maybe I'll even borrowing from fabric. You're weaving it, right? Because
Yeah.
you're putting
That's why
more
it's
of
called
them
that.
together.
Yeah,
I
that was the
hope so.
original intent behind the category name. Now, if you look up Gartner or Forrester and what they say about data fabrics, you will see there are different interpretations of this. Some do
Okay.
make copies, and that's how it goes. I mean, we have a worldview at Cinci that we take it more at face value. A fabric should be a fabric of data at the data level, i.e., hyperlinked data and stuff. But not everyone sees it that way yet. But this is how categories go. It's early days.
For
But one of
sure.
the upshots of that, I just want to point out quickly, is if you don't make copies, the controls, the access controls, who can edit it, who can view it, who can query it, are now universally enforceable. Like, there's no copies to chase, so you don't need to
Yes.
set access controls,
No
governance
leaks.
policies, app by app by app by app by app, and then have them ignored completely in data integration copies.
Right.
You're setting
And
them
go
at the
wander
data
away on
level.
a USB stick. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're set at the data level in the network on the data itself. And so that's how you sort of square the circle of innovation and data ownership or data protection.
Right. So just thinking about, if we do have, some newish data that we can use and we start along on this pathway, uh, there are some benefits just on that alone. You've said,
Yeah.
we have control. If I can think of it, we're kind of just thinking there's one source of data, because, like I said, if
Yeah.
the distance between this part of it and that part of it, if it's all abstracted, it doesn't matter. I just think of it as one database. So it could be my company, right? And I just think of,
Yeah.
as you said, the sum total of like what a bank is holding on to, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
kind of sitting there in one place. Which also, would I be right in guessing, since there isn't all these copies sitting around,
Yeah.
it's it's actually not as much data as we think. Like, this sounds really big and scary, but
Mhm.
if I think about it, it's so compact, and it's all unique data.
Mhm.
So it that's, to me, somehow sounds more manageable, because there shouldn't be so
Yeah.
much of it.
You're absolutely right. There's a lot less data in the world that people think. There's a lot of copies, but the only mitigating factor, sort of counterbalancing that, is, I suppose, IoT, which are devices that are just churning
Right.
out data
All day
at
long.
like a river,
Yeah.
and similarly synthetic data, which is becoming increasingly popular in the AI world, which is, it's hard to actually train
Yes.
algorithms with people's personal data, so let's make some fake data. But I think it's probably IoT is, and it's fine and valid approach to get around the data sourcing issue they face. The um, but the IoT issue is only, the Internet of Things is going to probably counterbalance any copies we can eliminate by data fabrics, because these things are um, but it can all be managed in a network. That's the other thing about networks, is their scalability, right? Like,
Yeah.
remember the old party lines of phones, when
Right.
it was almost a point to point. Uh, and but how many phones are there? I know, billions, all on one network.
Yeah.
And how many nodes in your brain? I think the average is 86 billion neurons. So
Right.
networks scale like beyond all human comprehension, really. And so luckily, IoT or not, the network architecture has scalability of any network.
So if I, let's say, begin in a startup on this new protocol, um, would it make things like the marketing analyst who has to
Yeah.
try and report on what is happening with acquiring customers? Does it make their job any easier?
For sure. And so I think this has been a really good conversation so far, and sort of some of the abstract concepts, but where does the rubber hit the road here?
Yeah.
What happens when you unbox Cinchi? Okay. So for example, if you buy Cinchi, it can be hosted on premise or in private cloud. You control it, you host it, it's your data. We're not a SaaS company in that respect, that we
Okay.
host your data, you host your data. But I often used to describe the next set of events as connect, protect, collaborate, build. And so
Take us through those.
so when you unbox it, you're going to load it into a server environment on premise or in the cloud, and then you're going to be project driven. So what you're growing really is almost a digital brain for your organization, and you don't learn everything all at once, or you don't grow a brain all at once. Just like in the real world, it's life that makes your brain populated with information. And so it's similar with Cinchi. You start with a project. Let's say it's a customer 360.
Sure.
That's your first project, and that's sort of in the analytic realm, but it could equally be a real-time system or a web app or something else you want to build, automation, etc. But let's say it's a 360 customer view. Think of it like a recipe. You need ingredients in that recipe of that 360 view. Some of those ingredients are going to come from your CRM and your ERP, and
Yep.
1,000 other apps potentially, or 100 others, or wherever your customer data is, all the touch point data that's scattered across all these silos. So what you're going to do is firstly design the data model for your customer 360. What are the columns in it? Like, what do
Yep.
you need to know? You need to know their location, their last time they logged into the website, the last thing they bought, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Once you build your sort of version 1.0 data model like that, then you start to look at your data sources. Some will exist in your apps. And so what you're going to do is what we call a last time copy or a last time integration once. So let's say Salesforce. You got a lot of
Sure.
customer data in your CRM. You're going to connect Salesforce to Cinchi. Maybe you're a big organization, you got multiple Salesforces. Connect those two only once, one and done. Maybe your other systems, other apps, you're going to connect those in because they contribute data to your model. And that's done through an interface that's pretty easy, can be done in minutes, but it doesn't have to take a big IT effort. These connections are done by API. They can be done in minutes,
Yep.
and once they're done, they're done. So now you got your customer data. You might need to augment that data with more sources. Let's say an AI ML tool enables that can predict customer outcome and churn outcomes, let's say,
Yep.
based on other data points. So you might connect that in too, because these are bi-directional connectors. You can feed data back to these apps and into the data fabric. So this is all in the connecting. You're sort of mapping your data into the data fabric.
Yes.
And once there, it all becomes interconnectable. So it's going to populate tables based on a schema that you've designed. You're mapping data into this environment.
Yep.
It sounds intimidating, but I guarantee you it's a rewarding and fun experience, because once it's done, it's done. You can reshape the model from Salesforce into how you want it. And once that's done, all the data can be linked, because it joins part of a fabric. It joins part of a network that can now be hyperlinked across these tables. But let's not forget the next important step, which is protect. So it's not a free-for-all. So once you've connected data from Salesforce and all the other systems into your fabric, that data may be governed or should be owned by different parts. Maybe the finance team should own some of the financial transaction stuff. Maybe the marketing team needs to know the website visit data. All this sort of stuff, you need to figure that out yourself, what your governance sort of arrangement is for your organization. But hopefully you have a governance policy, so you kind of have some idea of who should be
already.
Who has a fiduciary and other responsibility to look after what data. Maybe you have a compliance team that helps you with this. Maybe you don't. You're a small company, but you need to figure that out. But once you do, setting access controls, either for an individual, so now you've got all these tables, right? That came from your silos. So what you're going to do is simply go into a table and set access controls for things like what person or what group can view this data, download this data, which is kind of a no-no, but you can do it. Who can query this data, who can edit this data, like all of these right down to a cell or at the column level or at the whole table level. And so you get these really granular access controls. But once they're set, you're good to go, because what happens next is anyone you've granted access to can now access data and solve their problems. And this is sometimes called self-serve data, right? Like, or self-serve analytics.
So you want to be able to, this marketing analyst that we've imagined, they can think, okay, I know what I normally do, but there's another data source out there. I've never seen that one before.
Right.
And it's now part of this. So I can now imagine new questions.
Well, because Glenn, as the owner, has granted me access to it. So now, and not, maybe it's view only, or maybe it's view plus query. In the case of analytics, hopefully you've given me query access. But now I can go run amok without friction because you've granted me access. But if I get fired, you can revoke my access, and then that's it. Or if I move teams and I shouldn't have access to Glenn's data set anymore, you can revoke that access in about half a second. And there's other ways that process can be managed within the platform in a compliance automation, but that's another subject. But so this is kind of, you get the broad idea of how it works. So now you've connected the data you need for your customer 360. You've protected it, so who can see it and do what with it, including our analytics team. And then the third is build. So Cinchi is a data fabric platform that includes a kind of a no-code environment. So you can drag and drop, use a drag and drop interface to create a data model or a saved query, really, that generates an API. And that API can then feed Tableau, it can feed Power BI, it can feed our native chart tool. But all those access controls are respected and they persist into Tableau or what have you. And you can do it in seconds without joining any silos, without doing any data integration. So the other fun thing is, a lot of people on Salesforce, right, that one of your connected silos, think maybe you've got 20 analytics team people who have accounts with Salesforce only to see the data. They don't add customer information. They're not part of your sales team or marketing team. They're just there for the data. They don't need that seat anymore. They can use Cinchi because we offer unlimited users. So, it's the self-serve thing. Now they don't need Salesforce anymore.
Yeah, that's like users are anathema to a scalable database.
And the other cool outcome you can do is the other cool thing you can do, aside from like start to reduce the number of SaaS seats you have and need to maintain for people that just need the data, which is a lot of them, is remember those connectors into the fabric are bi-directional. So if you connect 3 different CRMs into the platform and that AI tool I talked about and some other data sets and some native data sets you've added on the platform natively itself, you can then use these data sets to augment each other and inform each other and create net new columns that are based on data feeds from all of these tables, and then feed that back, sort of augment. This is called data modernization or data augmentation. And so now you've got data making new data better, and
Right.
you can feed that back to Salesforce. So and so you can actually give your old SaaS apps, if you can't decommission them outright right away, you can start to give them superpowers and feed augmented data back into the SaaS app. So it's pretty incredible. Like you can do things like, for example, again in Salesforce, that they will never build for you. You're not important enough, but you can customize Salesforce with this personally awesome data. So like that customer churn prediction data, you can send right back into Salesforce where your salespeople can see it. So
Sure.
all sorts of outcomes are
Wow.
interesting.
A very hot area within the pay-per-click marketing and basically digital advertising space has more recently been algorithm training by informing them of what for them are off-platform conversions. So
Yeah.
it took 3 conversations that are only held inside of Salesforce before it was known that this particular prospect turned into a customer,
Yeah.
and the ad platform would really benefit from knowing that. So that sounds like this is, we have carried along the attributes of the information with their prospective privacy and, I guess, context, and then we can send it where it needs to go.
Yeah, and looking forward, you remember I mentioned the cliff of complexity, that your future is more and more silos and more app-based silos. Well, because there's a no-code element to the platform, you can build web apps, you can build hospital systems, healthcare systems, you can build all this without making silos or copies. So you can start to decommission apps in your rearview mirror. So
Right.
now, project by project by project by project, slowly you're getting your analytics and data-centric people off SaaS apps. They should be in a controlled environment where they access it, driven by access controls set by the rightful data owner. And then as you fast forward 10 years, and you're going to start to decommission SaaS apps, right, in your rearview mirror, because you've replaced them with these super controlled, super nimble and agile new um, apps built that are wired different. They're powered by a network, yours and in the future others,
Yeah.
not by a bunch of silos. So this is how you start the beginning of the end. This is the beginning of the end of silo proliferation and traditional apps. And so this is how, and not only the upside is, the carrot here isn't data protection and data ownership, although you get that
Right.
because you're not making copies. It's the efficiency of how you can build apps that would take, like I said, 18 months and $5 million and literally do it in a week. We worked with a wholesale bank in Western Canada that needed a loan processing system for SEBA loans during COVID.
Yeah.
These are loans for farmers and small business owners, and the government said, here's the money, but you can't just put it in the back parking lot and say, come and pick up the money. They needed to build a new system to actually allow people to apply for it and deliver these funds. No hyperbole. They were able to use this technology to build that in 5 days, which, there's a case study on our website. This is the
Yeah.
future.
Well, this is it, and it's funny that you say that because it's like a leapfrogging feature, and I think this is one that in marketing is um, better for us to look at now compared to doing what I suppose the past would suggest we do. What I mean by that is I've always been in technology companies, and the way that software code has been developed, has changed. But it went through several changes in the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s, and now it's there's a whole lot of new things that just reuse existing libraries and objects, right? But it wasn't always that way. Your point about setting up an application like giving out loans to farmers, if marketing were trying to do something like that today,
Mhm.
given that we haven't been sitting alongside of IT as they've made all of this
Mhm.
progress, we may, in our ignorance, think, well, I need to set up a login session
Mhm.
entity, and I need to kind of hold those people's names on a table. And like my whole point is, we would be doing it the way that you could build software, but the IT guys stopped using 50 years ago or 30
Well,
years ago, right? And
it's
we're
yeah.
better to just go straight to the way that the fleet of foot are doing it now.
Yeah, but there's still identity management, and so there's still a world whereby it's a data fabric will leverage certain apps that do a great task, such as identity. So, for example,
Okay.
I just built a community, sort of I won't call it social media, but we have a Data for Good organization, a nonprofit called the Data Collaboration Alliance, which you can
Yep.
find at datacollaboration.org. And recently, we're just in the process of launching a beta for a new community, which is open to anyone that's fascinated by data and what I'm talking about today. It's just an app, if you will, that's built on top of a fabric in the way I described, and we built it in like 5 weeks. But you can log in there. Please use the single sign-on. If you
Okay.
go to data, you'll see there's a sign-up button at datacollaboration.org/community, and I'm
Gotcha.
sure you can provide a link for
Yep.
folks.
We will.
But you click that, you'll say join free, hit that, use the single sign on. And that single sign on is Okta. And that's what we're using for identity management. So,
Right.
and when you log in, you'll see an experience where, I've created so we can crowdsource data sets and build free tools for good causes. It's sort of our for good initiative. But so it's an app where we collaborate, like I say, for good causes. And, but, but to your point about it looks and smells like an app, and to some extent some of the features are driven by traditional app like technology like Okta for identity management,
Uh-huh.
but a lot of it, but there's no database behind it. In this app, there's no data integration happening.
Or no,
The
yeah, no
access
new
controls
data.
we set as a community are
Yeah.
universally enforced. It's enabled me to replace a consent form with what I call a data ownership bill of rights, because it's a zero copy environment. Like, anyway, so I won't
No,
get
but
off my
that's an
soapbox a bit.
excellent point. Is we can,
Yeah,
many of the things that we see as the baggage of how websites and
hmm
things today. You're right. It's all us chasing this paradigm of data's propagating everywhere, and so we got to make sure that we don't leave ourselves legally vulnerable, et cetera, et cetera. But things like single sign-on, things like the network is the app. um,
yeah,
this is very optimistic. Do you foresee that others will be able to, if it is information that's publicly, for public
yeah,
consumption, things like the weather, right? So let's say
yeah,
that you wanted to go and add into
yeah.
whatever functionality you have somebody's tracking of what the weather is going to be based on historical models. Like, is
Yeah.
that the kind of thing that becomes possible?
Yeah, and that's why we call the Data Collaboration Alliance. And collaboration on a data set, and now imagine a table of data again, there's rows and columns. And some columns can be owned by a person, some could be owned by a system like a weather reporting station
Sure.
that's connected into the fabric and populating that column. It could be an AI tool. It could be a lot of things, but it's collaboration, or it could be your colleague. And so the access controls drive the ability to people collaborate in a very frictionless way because you have access, and you can only see what you have been granted access to. And that opens up a whole. So imagine today you get in the morning, you have a cup of coffee, and you log into email. Imagine you log into a data network as your first port of call rather than your email. And so maybe your emails are in on the fabric and you can read them there and grant people access to read your emails or close it if you want. But it becomes almost like the operating system, your digital brain of your organization. And
Right.
by collaborating on data, you're paying it forward to everyone else who may have access to that data and vice versa. And so what you're growing is an organizational brain instead of like checking email, which obviously has great utility for just communication, but the data is trapped. I
Yes.
can't see Glenn's emails, and Glenn can't see Chris's, but maybe sometimes I want to do
Yeah.
that.
Or
Maybe I
when
want to,
we do try to cross them,
yeah,
it's very ham-fisted. We can, all of
yes,
us,
it's
see.
copies
Yeah, and we can
or
see
forwards.
the rough edges are jutting out from,
Yeah.
we don't even have to understand really what a nicely architected solution is. We all know that
Right.
that's a jinky setup.
And this notion of collaboration already exists. So think of a Google Doc. I'm of a certain
Right.
age where I remember collaborating on a document was, sending
Here,
copies back
let
and
me
forth. I got
or let me get you my 5 1/4 inch disc.
yeah, it was a nightmare, and the changes got out of sync, and nobody knew what was going on. And
Yeah.
I feel for anyway. So, but now enter Google Docs, where we're collaborating on a single version, but not just collaborating between Chris and Glenn on a doc, but Chris and Glenn and Grammarly, which is just a robot that's collaborating with us.
Good
And
point.
so that notion of collaborating between people and systems or software collaborating all at once, we're already familiar with. We do it all the time. They're called Google Docs. Imagine the same thing, but on a table of data instead of a doc. And that
Yeah.
you get the essence of how data collaboration can work. And it's super powerful. And you and I have just we've gone from spreadsheet jockeys into proto technologists because we're adding data and information to an operational, like I say, like almost an operating system for our organization. So we're really shifting gears where everyone's contributing to the knowledge of the organization, and we call that collaborative intelligence. That's sort of like the
Sure.
outcome. We didn't make that up. That's been around for a while, but it's how society works, in
And
fact.
but it sure sounds like a future that I'd like to be in. And don't want to finish this topic without mentioning the one thing that probably some people are thinking this sounds
Hmm.
kind of similar to, but could you set me
Hmm.
straight on blockchain and whether or not there's
Yeah, I'm glad
anything
you
that,
asked.
you know,
Yeah.
eh, does or doesn't jive with what we're speaking of here?
No, I'm really happy you asked because yeah. So Web 3.0, let's just abstract a little.
Sure.
So Web 3 or the future of data and apps is really let's just take it for what it really is intended for. There's some outcomes we all want and deserve as human beings contributing to this digital universe we're in. So one is transparency. You should be able to see what happened, when, where, and by whom.
Yep.
Blockchain focuses on transactions, but other transactions are non-financial ones. So transparency, decentralization, like Glenn and Chris should be able to own their own data and not
Right.
have our 20 different enterprise organizations own our personal information, and so there's a decentralization to it. um, and so these are a couple of the transparency, decentralization, um, and control, and so these are some of the outcomes we want from the future web. Now, if we just focus on those outcomes instead of the technologies that will produce those outcomes, we'll save a lot of breath, because most Web 3.0 people will say that that can only be served by blockchain technology. But I'm here to tell you that that's ridiculous.
Okay.
Blockchain is an important and highly technology that will form part of the future of data and applications. That's I put money on that.
Sure.
But there are other technologies like the ones I've been describing today: an operational data fabric, dataware, encryption. There are many other technologies, self-sovereign identity, which is like an offspin of blockchain. These are all technologies that will form part of a mix of the future of the web and apps. And so what we need to do, and part of that, you mentioned one of my hats is at the Data Collaboration Alliance at datacollaboration.org. Part of one of our main projects is called the Collaborative Intelligence Network. And what that is our take on Web3. It's an infrastructure project where we're trying to ensure that these technologies of today and tomorrow interoperate and don't fight each other to what should be a shared outcome, which is transparency and decentralization and efficiency. So we run like interoperability tests between these different technologies to make sure they're compatible. What's TCP? What's TCP without IP? And
Yeah.
out of that could come protocols. Out of that comes standards. We're close to a new standard we supported at the Alliance called Zero Copy Integration. It's a framework for innovation, and it's now in the public consultation, or soon to be, and will be a national standard and a world's first in Canada, and hopefully in about 60 to 70 days.
Great.
So you can check that on our website too. But so the point is, blockchain's one technology, not the only technology that will help build Web3 or the future of data and applications. And it has a very solid place, particularly in the area of transactions. But it's not the only technology that can
Right.
produce an
Right.
immutable ledger, for
Right.
example.
And so they're moving in parallel. And I would wager that there is nobody closer to all of these than you. So for those of us who are removed from it, I think that the takeaway is that despite the fact that some of the terms may change,
Yeah.
there's going to be a settling of dust, and
Yes.
this is how every creative disruptive time period goes. But we should be paying attention to these terms more to say what they mean, which is why you said, let's just
Yeah.
save ourselves some breath here. So if we hear things that are like this, it's
Yes.
probably around the same thing. And if it seems like it could matter to us in our day-to-day lives, we're
Yeah.
better to lean into that.
Yeah, my litmus test for the tech of tomorrow, particularly in data management, is does it minimize data usage? You don't have to eliminate copies overnight. Like, I'm not suggesting that, but
Right.
is it helping you reduce the amount of data you use? That's good. That's a good start.
Yeah.
Does it eliminate silos or help you decommission silos? And if the answer to both questions is no, then it's a Web 2 technology. It's exacerbating the problem with Web 2.0, which is lack of control of data by anybody, not just consumers and citizens, but by organizations and governments. It's a big sort of, I don't want to say lie, but it's a misunderstanding of how technology works to think that anyone has meaningful control over data, whether they're compelled to register, regulatorily or not. They don't. And we're hanging on by our fingernails here. So,
well, I
my litmus
think
test
data's
is,
gotten big enough, right? So we don't necessarily
Yeah.
need big data. Maybe small is the new big.
Well, efficient, purpose-based, efficient. And like I say, the answer is, the beauty of it is the answer is literally between our ears. Like, the best network for knowledge and
Right.
information you're ever going to know is our brain.
Just follow
So
that.
why haven't we? So AIML is about replicating how we learn. It's not the architecture of the brain. That's where dataware, data fabrics come in. They're trying to replicate the architecture, the infrastructure of the brain. AIML sits on top of that, and that replicates how we learn. But that's a different thing than how the brain is actually architected.
Right, but they can hopefully work together virtuously.
They can definitely and should work together, because one is a controlled environment, and therefore, anyway, that's another conversation about responsible AI, but I'd be happy to have it sometime.
Wow. All right, Chris. And it would need to be another time. We have taken up enough of ours today and of the listeners, and I just want to, in conclusion, thank you so much for coming on. We'll have links to all of the items that you did talk about, including the podcast. And is there anywhere else you'd like to point people?
No, just to sum up again, thanks for your time, Glenn. I enjoy these chats. It's been my privilege. And if you want to get a taste of what, again, it's at datacollaboration.org. That's our nonprofit. We have free partnerships. If this is something, a future you want to align your company or organization toward. And like I say, there's a community. If you go to datacollaboration.org/community, you hit that link, join for free. Please use the single sign-on button, because it's a bit hacky. It's in early beta, but feel free to check it out, and you'll start to get a sense of what collaboration on data can look like. It's sort of my version of it, but there's other ways it can look. So please do.
That's fantastic. Thank you again, and I am really glad that people got a chance to listen to this, and I hope that if they find someone in their Hardy Heart network, that they'll share this episode with them as well. And that they
shouldn't I, Glenn? Sorry. Sure. Also, it's Cinchy.com, CINCHY. I mean, if you want it, there's a bunch of videos on there, but obviously we're a vendor, so there's a perspective, and it's less. Right. But there's a ton of really good videos on there that explains a lot of these concepts and features as well at Cinchy.com.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I'm sure people got ideas about how to make their funnel better out of this. Thanks again.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.